Again, this is my backyard here in Eugene. I've been doing suburban permaculture on my place here for the 23 years that I've lived here in the River Road neighborhood. And here is a little more info here. There's a nice video tour and interview of the place. You can check that out when you want. I want to mention that this presentation is going on YouTube. There's a lot of text in this presentation. I'm not going to read all the text. What you can do is find out where the link to YouTube is. This will be on YouTube in a few days. You can go through the presentation again, and you can check out whatever you want to check out for more detail. There's a lot of information in text, and I'm not going to read all of that. So greetings. This presentation is really for anyone. I would love it if people shared this presentation with people who don't know anything about permaculture, even people who are favorable to the former President Trump. I would love for those people to see this kind of information. I can share some of those grievances, but I think permaculture, in my own opinion, may be a more positive way to address some of those issues. So this is for people who are fully into paradigm shift, interested, already doing this. So you can take a look at this more on the YouTube version if you like. So what exactly are we talking about with paradigm shift? In this series, paradigm shift refers to a movement towards a present and future where humans fit within the boundaries of the natural world. The goal of society is to bring out the best and positive human potential, and we have an economic system that serves the healthy goals of an uplifted society. My interests are every bit as much social as they are ecological. We're in ecological crisis. We're also in social crisis as well. And positive paradigm shift can address a lot of these issues at the same time. We'll take a little bit closer look at that. So here is a wonderful little graphic. I'm going to move on, but again, you can watch this on YouTube and take a closer look at that graphic. And we'll see this graphic again, actually. I like this graphic a lot. So just in terms of orientation, I just want to share a few of the highlights of kind of what motivates me for doing this. I am not being paid by anyone. This is just my own initiative. We'll hear this term more as time goes on. What do we do? How do we prioritize our time and money? That is an absolutely fundamental part of paradigm shift. I prioritize my time to be able to do something like this or work on my property. Our society will not reach sustainability, peace, and justice as long as capitalism and its political and business servants control the larger economy and continue to push the consumer culture. We can make paradigm shift in our own lives. This isn't some magical, wonderful future. It can happen right now, bits and pieces of that. Thousands of people are already doing this. Perhaps some of you as well are already spending part of your time in paradigm shift. I know I am. I know a lot of people who already are. This isn't the future. We just decide these are some of the actions we're going to take in our own life. Another important item, capitalism and the consumer culture have provided us with an immense variety of tools, assets, and opportunities to assist in its own replacement. We'll hear a little more about that. Paradigm shift begins, as I just mentioned, with how we manage our own time and money. The benefits of paradigm shift, as mentioned, are ecological, they're social, they're personal, they're aesthetic, even spiritual. For many thousands of people and progressive organizations already working to create a better world, to openly agree we are a movement, we have common cause, and our goal is to replace capitalism and the consumer culture with healthy alternatives. That kind of common denominator agreement and understanding and a shared identity could greatly empower and fortify all involved. I know a lot of people in groups don't want to say we want to replace capitalism. We need to say that. We need to be out front. And this needs to be, of course, done in a totally peaceful way. Do we have time for that? That remains to be seen. But a sustainable future is just not possible with capitalism and the consumer culture. Many of the most challenging and expensive problems facing individuals in our society are avoidable. We'll take a closer look at external costs a little bit later in this particular presentation. Every neighborhood and community has surprising allies and assets to work with for creating a preferred future. I like this one. Positive human potential is our greatest renewable resource. Many positive actions for paradigm shift can take place at the personal and home scale with no permission needed. Untold numbers of people all over the world are already creating paradigm shift in their own lives. And of course, here is where we are. Let's just a quick look at the 4 parts of the primer, just to provide a little bit of context here. This is what we're looking at this evening, Critique of Capitalism. Capitalism, I believe, is the common denominator for lots and lots of problems. And when we address the issue of capitalism in constructive, positive ways, we begin to address a lot of different problems all at the same time. And this is aspects of paradigm shift. This is part 2 and a larger version of that graphic I mentioned before. We'll see more about this graphic right here. And I want to remind people, you are free and given permission to do a screen grab of anything you see here. You know your computer's got a function where you can grab whatever's on the screen. You're welcome to do that here. This is completely open source. So this is part 2, aspects of paradigm shift. That's next week. And then November 22nd, paradigm shift. We're going to take a look at various organizations and individuals, initiatives and efforts to address paradigm shift, to move the idea of paradigm shift forward. This is really exciting. I encourage anyone here, like John was mentioning, if you know or are a part of an effort, an initiative that fits in with what you consider paradigm shift, please tell me about it. My email is in the chat. I'd love to hear it. Maybe that information makes its way onto another presentation. I'd love to hear good stories about what people are actually doing in real life to move this situation in a better direction. So part 3 will take a little look at different places. Syracuse, New York. This is, of course, my backyard. Permaculture in a public school in Hood River, Oregon. This is one of my favorite super blocks in Barcelona, Spain. I have a big interest in urban land use. I've been in Barcelona and I've toured some of these super blocks, and it is absolutely mind-blowing. So we'll see and hear a little bit more about that. That will be November 22nd right there. And then the final part of this series, November 29, taking paradigm shift to a wider audience. How can we get this information out to more people? And again, this isn't just my information. I've learned a tremendous amount from other people a lot of my opinions and what I know come from somewhere else. We can all build on what we learn. That's an important part, an important dynamic of paradigm shift. We share what we're learning with each other. So that is a primary ideal. What would it be like if all the big organizations like the American Association of Retired Persons and the Sierra Club and lots of other more or less progressive organizations started sharing this kind of information with their memberships? I'd love to see that. So, okay, this is the contents for part one, a critique of capitalism. And I'm not going to read all this. We're going to see what these different parts of the content are like right about now. And again, you can watch this presentation on YouTube when it's there in a few days, and you can take your time and you can read the fine print because there's a lot of information here. I'm not going to read all of this. Our lifestyles of affluence and convenience, like our housing, transportation, food choices, recreation, are almost all based on the overconsumption of resources and energy. We are taught to overconsume. That's, of course, what advertising is all about. It's what we're surrounded by. We think it's normal. This overconsumption is basically what's behind so many social, economic, political, environmental problems. It's overconsumption. This product of social engineering is commonly referred to as the consumer culture. When we buy oversized and excess products, we're actually investing in our own social engineering and disempowerment. The consumer culture provides just an amazing variety of distractions that keep us from doing what we need to do. You can think of lots of those. The entertainment, the celebrity culture. We've got better things to do than seeing endless news coverage of Taylor Swift. Of course, she's an enormous talent. She's beautiful and all of that, but we've got better things to do than reading about her or pro football and tractor pulls. There's better things to do. Paradigm shift calls for patronizing the positive that can assist paradigm shift and boycott what doesn't. As mentioned, the consumer culture absolutely does create products and services that are enormously useful and healthy for paradigm shift. Let's spend our money on those products. And if we don't buy the harmful stuff, then maybe market forces and the magic hand can actually come into play. If people don't buy the junk food and there's no money to be made, then maybe junk food goes away. And we could duplicate that with a lot of other products too. Social engineering calls for supersized consumption, and the results are supersized problems. That's exactly what we have. Climate change is a supersized problem. It is not an isolated phenomenon. It is a symptom of our consumer culture. Liberation, a huge part of paradigm shift is our own liberation, is our own discovering and putting into action our own positive potentials, our own energies. Liberation is empowering. It is an essential ingredient in paradigm shift. And liberation can be delivered in lots of different ways. We have a non-commercial radio station here in Eugene. This is a group in Missoula, Montana, teaching more rural kinds of skills. We had a permaculture convergence in my suburban neighborhood a few years ago that attracted 700 people at our neighborhood recreation center. That's liberation. This is a housing co-op in Eugene. That's liberation. This is Onondaga Earth Core. That's liberation. Liberation comes in a lot of different ways, and it unleashes the human spirit. Okay, deconstructing the myths of capitalism. We've heard of these different types of ideals of capitalism all our life. The magic hand, informed choice, efficiency, gross domestic product, democracy and capitalism, and American exceptionalism. So we're just going to go through each of these and do a little bit of deconstruction. And of course, other people have addressed these issues as well. This is going to be pretty brief, but I think you may hear some different takes on this particular issue. Of course, this is a graphic of what's happening to the planet. The magic hand, the myth of the magic hand reads, through individual self-interest and freedom of production, as well as consumption, the best interests of society are filled. I don't know who came up with that, but I can't think of anything that's much less true than that. Neoliberal economics calls for minimum regulation of business and let the market decide. Well, an enormous part of our nation's economy exists to repair the damage of the magic hand. Think of all the sectors of the economy that are there to provide the care, for example, medical care for people eating too much junk food, or people in car wrecks. This is the magic hand at work. Yes, the magic hand creates lots of economic activity, and a lot of that economic activity is repairing the damage caused by the magic hand. So here is a little bit more oversized homes, which are a big part of our consumer society. Pollution, this is the magic hand at work. Ugly urban landscape, all of these pictures show what the magic hand is up to. And this is only a small fragment of the magic hand at work. To say these types of outcomes are the best interest in society, I can't imagine anybody could even guess at how anyone could come up with that kind of a conclusion. Informed choice. Informed choice tells us that the economic system will give people the information they need about the products. Of course, we have competition. We've got choice A, B, C, and D, and all the way through the rest of the alphabet for some products. Give people the correct information and let them decide what's best for them. Well, that's a great idea, but informed choice doesn't happen. Informed choice is a fiction. It's important to understand a word, a concept I would imagine almost everyone here is acquainted with. It's called external cost. And what that means is a product is sold from a seller to a buyer, and the use of that product impacts more than just the person using the product. What's a real simple comment? A leaf blower. A gasoline powered leaf blower creates a lot of external costs, the noise it makes, but also for the person using it, because that's a two-stroke engine and they're breathing a lot of fumes that are not good for them. That's just a tiny example of external costs. Suburbia, which we'll take a closer look at a little bit later in this presentation, that's the source of a lot of other external costs. All the cars, the highway infrastructure, the accidents, the air pollution, all of those are external costs. External costs amount to an enormous subsidy of trillions of dollars over just a few short years to the economic system and the affluence and the American way of life. The American dream, depends on a dishonest economic system. The price we pay for a product doesn't cover the damage that product causes to people and planet. For example, if we paid an honest price for a gallon of gasoline, who knows what it would actually cost? People have guessed $25, $30. It would depend on how one were to figure out that damage, but it certainly would cost an enormous amount more than what we pay right now. But when you buy a gallon of gas, these consequences of gasoline are not brought to your attention. It's not the people in Louisiana along the Mississippi River and Cancer Alley, doesn't mention that, doesn't mention the 40,000 people killed in car wrecks every year, the air pollution, the water pollution, the blowouts, the damage caused where that oil comes from. I have a friend who's from Ecuador, and she didn't know these particular women, but she said, oh yeah, that's the Ecuador Amazon, where there's a lot of oil and gold prospecting that is polluting and ruining the livelihood of people who live there. The gigantic military that we have exists to protect capitalism. That is also an external cost. That doesn't show up in the price of a gallon of gasoline. Of course, climate change. So that's a good concept to keep in mind when we're talking with people about paradigm shift, is the whole idea of external costs. And of course, that's related to efficiency. Capitalism claims to be the most efficient system produce products and services. Efficiency means the most desired output with the least amount of input. Our supersized consumer way of life would collapse if it were efficient. Our wealth, convenience, and affluence depends on excess and inefficiency. And again, we see some similar pictures. We see quite a few pictures repeatedly here in this presentation. Economic efficiency, we can focus on cars. The pollution is wasted energy. The medical cost, both for the traffic accidents and the damage to public property, that's a very expensive inefficiency. Part of automobiles, of course, is suburbia, where people commonly have to drive someplace to go get a loaf of bread or go to school or go to the gym. That's extremely inefficient. The time lost in traffic is inefficient. The expense of automobile infrastructure is just staggering. Imagine what we could do with that money instead of more and bigger freeways. That's inefficiency. The cost of climate change, that's inefficiency. When I flashed on this particular illumination a good number of years ago, I just shook my head and say, that's pretty amazing. What this graphic here shows is these are sectors of the economy. Any economy has lots of different sectors. If you can see this, there's healthcare, there's retail, there's hotels and food, there's administration, education, administration, finance. There's lots of different sectors to an economy. And when I illuminated on this realization some time ago, the realization goes like this. We have millions of jobs that exist to repair the damage caused by millions of other jobs. There's just no way to deny that. There's cause and effect of the junk food, the tobacco, the automobiles, lots of products. These are, again, the external costs, and the external costs and the inefficiency do create a lot of jobs. Once again, they exist to repair the damage caused by millions of other jobs. Again, how do we pay for paradigm shift? We quit making these same mistakes over and over again. And as we'll get into a little bit more in part two, this can happen in the individual scale or personal scale in our homes and our families. As was mentioned in some of our conversation before the presentation, that is a place where we do have some influence, where we can more manage what our own actions are. And as was mentioned before, also enough people starting to make these kinds of choices, they start bumping into each other. Oh, you're in the paradigm. Then it grows. That's the ideal here. My focus is at the human, personal, home, and neighborhood scale. There's other scales that are important too, absolutely. If somebody wants to try to petition and lobby their elected official, great. That's not my focus. My focus is at home and in the neighborhood. But wherever somebody feels called to, make the most of your efforts wherever you're called to. There needs to be some effort towards paradigm shift at all levels, absolutely. Suburbia is the magic hand at work. I invite you to check this out, this story about suburbia with YouTube. I'm not going to go through all of this. I would also recommend an excellent book titled Crabgrass Frontier by Ken Jackson is his name. He's a history professor at Columbia University. I interviewed him one time. Suburbia is not an accident. Suburbia is the economic system at work. Suburbia is the economic system, the businesses that have the cars and the infrastructure, the oil, the tires, the construction. They have the money to influence public policy. And that's why we have suburbia, because there's more money to be made with building dispersed suburban detached homes that are mostly oversized than something that's reasonably efficient and urban planning that doesn't require having a car. The economic system prefers suburbia because it creates more economic activity and, of course, more external costs at the same time. Here is some early 1930s suburbia. I'm imagining this is probably Phoenix, could be a lot of different places. This particular graphic amazed me when I first saw it. This is two cities in scale. This is Atlanta right here. It could be Houston, it could be Denver, it could be any of almost any American city. This is Barcelona, Spain. It just happens that these two regions have approximately similar populations. A similar number of people live in the Atlanta metro area and also the Barcelona metro area. The urban footprint of Atlanta is something like 25 times larger. This is just astounding when I first saw this. That means, of course, this is very car dependent, and Barcelona is dense even by European standards. I spent time in Barcelona. I love Barcelona. Could I live there? It's so different from what I'm used to. I don't know if I could, but there's beautiful, wonderful aspects to a more dense type of urban form. But this is an enormous ecological footprint, and this is a smaller ecological footprint. And of course, Barcelona is where the superblocks are. We'll hear more about superblocks. If they can manage something like that in such a dense urban location, we are performing poorly to not being able to do anything remotely like what's happening in Barcelona, because we're not. There's nothing like that going on anywhere in the United States. Something mentioned before, climate change is a symptom. climate change is extremely inefficient. I came upon this little graphic right here. This shows the source historically going back a couple hundred years of carbon footprints. I'm assuming this is accurate enough. I can't vouch for it. I didn't do the research, but it seems to fit. Take it or leave it. But there's the United States over this period of time. There's Africa, China, France, and these other rectangles are other countries as well. A pretty amazing illustration. Climate change, very inefficient wildfires, floods, migration, drought. Another item that qualifies as a mythology, I'll include it here, is gross national product. And of course, that's a measure of all the economic buying and selling and consuming in the country over a given period of time. And of course, we all grew up with GNP as being something as the metric that identifies the well-being of our country. GNP is not a good measurement of well-being of a country. It certainly can record the increase in size of the economic system. I have no doubt it does that, but it is with zero nuance. It just says, wow, our economy is doing well. We're growing at 2, 3, 3.5%, 4% per year. That's an enormous amount of economic activity. And the message with gross national product is that this is a measurement that tells us the success of our society. And it doesn't say anything about the external costs or the social dislocation, disequity, the species going extinct. Gross national product kind of is a metric that dumbs us down. So, but there are increasing number of people who are saying we need a different set of metrics to determine our nation's well-being. There are a lot of good thought on that, about education, about longevity, about community participation, education, again, different types of measurements that do a far better job at explaining and describing the well-being of our society. But gross national product has kind of muscled its way into the front line. And it's only in more recent years that people are saying this is not a good way to describe the condition of our society. So another mythology is capitalism and democracy, that they are a wonderful fit. And I don't think too many people would disagree that they're not a very good fit at all when money is considered free speech. The amount of economic wealth easily translates into political wealth. I read this statistic from the Federal Reserve. The most affluent 1% of our nation's population owns 16 times more wealth than the bottom 50% of the population. That means something like 3.5 million people have 16 times the wealth of the least affluent 170 million people. That's the magic hand right there. That is directly translates into political power, because people who are just getting by don't have the money to contribute to the candidate who's going to look after their interests. And that's not to say that every candidate is tied to money. Of course, there are some wonderful elected politicians, absolutely, but it's not a surprise that campaign finance reform is a common issue that is in the public domain. How can we make sure that our elections are free and fair? Just because we can vote doesn't mean we have a democracy. And then, of course, what are the agendas of the politicians running for office? Almost all of them serve the current economic system. So here is another capitalism concentrates economic wealth. This is similar to what I just mentioned right here. This is another graphic. This one is very interesting. It shows different countries and their comparative economic disequity. This goes up to about 2015, but these are other affluent countries, and the disequity is an issue in all of these countries, but even most so according to this graphic in the United States. Again, you can watch the YouTube version of this and take a look in more detail. Some might say our elections are a place to vote on our goals and values, but that's kind of limited. Few candidates run on a platform that challenges capitalism. Even fewer have a prayer for winning the election if they ran on a campaign opposing capitalism. Is it simply that there's little interest in challenging capitalism? I think a lot of people, it doesn't even occur to them to challenge capitalism. They're too busy trying to get by or too busy with their entertainment. Or is it that challenging capitalism just doesn't receive a fair amount of attention in the media? I don't have an answer for that myself. Campaign finance reform is a well-known issue. If money equals free speech, then it's safe to say money can buy votes. Why else would wealthy people and big businesses donate hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars? They're not giving that money away. They want results from those investments. That's exactly what they are. They're investments. American exceptionalism. The term American exceptionalism is used to describe the belief that the United States occupies a special position in history and on the global stage by virtue of certain characteristics held to be unique to the United States. My take on this is that yes, absolutely, Americans are exceptional, particularly the Europeans, the Americans who came from Europe. When the early settlers came to North America, it was like winning the lottery. This continent is just totally loaded with water, with soil, with forests, with lakes, with mineral endowments. It was like winning the lottery coming here. And what Americans have been exceptional in right up to the present is being very successful in turning this beauty and this nature into money. That's why we're so wealthy, because we've been so exceptional at turning nature into money. That's what makes us affluent. That's what pays for the military. That's what pays for the oversized houses, is turning nature into money. The ethos of our society, in a similar way, is to use lots of resources just because there's a lot there to use. It's not because 3 people need to live in a 2,000 square foot house. 3 people live in a 2,000 square foot house or even larger because they can afford it. It's not because they need all that. Again, this is the magic hand. I try to sell as much stuff as possible. These 2 pictures, just early highway interchange and something a little bit more up to date right here. Okay, just a little mention suburbia, just a little short history of suburbia, because this illustrates how economic interests have had so profound effect on our daily lives. I live in suburbia. I've lived in suburbia most of my life, and a lot of us have lived in suburbia. It's not an accident that suburbia exists. During the Great Depression, there was a need to put workers back to work. The construction trades were particularly hit hard by the Depression. There was an idea for the government to get into housing policy. Up to that point, the federal government was not involved in housing policy, but the Great Depression was a special circumstance. So what the federal government ended up doing was encouraging business to create suburbia. That's the short story. Rather than more developed, more urban types of residential development. The policies went towards suburbia because that created more jobs. Suburbia in the beginning and right up to the present is essentially a make work project, is to put people to work. After World War II, there was a severe housing shortage. During the war, all the financial and economic activity was to support the war effort. That meant there was a big housing shortage after World War II. All the troops come back, had hard times finding places to live. So all the GNP, if you will, the government, the national production went into creating places for people to live. And those policies favored suburbia. The GI Bill helped GIs buy suburban houses in places like Levittown. That was another big example of suburbia receiving all this support and encouragement when more dense, more urban types of housing was neglected. And of course, as people have written and researched, documented that suburbia, particularly in the early years, was very racist as well. In Levittown, they didn't like Black people and they didn't like Jewish people in Levittown. Fortunately, some of that has been addressed, but even more important to address is we should just quit building more suburbia. The interstate highway system is another example of government policy that has supercharged the use of automobiles and, of course, opened up to development more peripheral locations to urban areas. And of course, that was mostly white people who went out to the suburbs. That's a huge, basically, subsidy for automobiles and highway infrastructure. The beneficiaries of all this development were business that had suburbia, highways, automobiles, and related products to sell. And I'm sure many of us have heard about the National City Lines. This was a front company, eventually, of General Motors, Firestone, Standard Oil, and some others that bought the transportation systems in a lot of big cities and smaller cities too, all over the country. And they purposefully ran down the trolleys and the public transportation systems to replace them with buses and tires and motor fuel. They were found guilty. One can say, well, cars were in the ascendancy anyway. This was just natural selection that we lost so many wonderful public transportation systems. There's something to be said to that, of course, but then why were cars in the ascendancy? Because there was policy support. Trains at an early point were determined to be a private enterprise for the most part, and highways and cars were public. Automobile infrastructure was a public expense. There's more to the story. You can research it if you like, but there's no dispute that these leading corporations have had an enormous amount to do with the condition that we now are living in with suburbia and dependence on automobiles. Here are some historical pictures. This is real interesting here too. These are actually what at the maximum development, what a number of regional rail transportation systems look like. Of course, this is the red line around Los Angeles. You could go all the way out to Riverside. You could go all the way down to Balboa. You can see the scale of miles. This went on for 50, 60 miles. I've ridden on the newer version from Riverside into LA. It takes about an hour. This would have been just an enormous public transportation system. It was privately owned. And then, of course, this all got scrapped. I used to live in Denison. I used to live in Dallas. I went to college in Denton. This is what the regional transportation system looked like in the 20s and 30s and 40s. There's tiny little bits of this now. You can go from Dallas to Denton. You can go from Dallas to Fort Worth. Not a whole lot more than that. This is where I live in Eugene. There used to be 24 trains a day between Eugene and Portland, and now there's 2, and that's with a much larger population. So the take-home message here is that financial interests have had an enormous amount to do with our dependence on automobiles and all the external costs that go along with them. And of course, here's the interstate highways. There were freeways bulldozed through minority, low-income neighborhoods all over the country. And now some of those cities are rethinking that maybe we can repair some of this damage. That's maybe hopeful, but the interstate highways have just had an enormous consequence on the way we live. So we've got just a couple more things to look at here. We're on the home stretch of this evening's presentation. This is just a really important item to call attention to. If you've heard this quote before, the American way of life is non-negotiable. That's been credited to a number of politicians with some name recognition, like Dick Cheney, one of the Bushes. I don't know if it was the older Bush or the younger Bush, and probably others too. The American way of life is non-negotiable. And basically what this is saying is that you, me, and everybody else has to live in the consumer culture, whether we want to or not. It's non-negotiable. This is a declaration of a level I would consider to be authoritarian. This is telling you you've got to live in this kind of a society. And absolutely, we can create our own little micro habitats like I have, and probably some people here have also. Certainly, there's nobody that's come to my door and said, you have to put in a driveway. I took out my driveway 20 years ago. But the fact is that this kind of unbelievably arrogant statement does give us some sort of an idea of the mindset of many of the people who control the country. America's wealth, global power, affluence is based on overconsumption and social engineering, external costs, damage to the natural world, and dishonesty. And this quote is saying, you need to learn to live with it because this is all there is. But paradigm shift is all about creating alternatives to this. That's why it's so important. The American way of life is non-negotiable. Many millions of people are complicit because they continue to buy the products. As long as people continue to buy the products of this economic system, the consumer culture, we're going to just have more of the same. And one of the primary messages of paradigm shift is to thoughtfully and hopefully to gracefully reduce our ecological footprints. Even after all this critique, the economy does produce many healthy and useful products and services. Absolutely, they're easy to find. There's lots of good stuff that can help advance the cause. of paradigm shift. More paradigm shift leads to more paradigm shift. The primer will explain a variety of empowering aspects of paradigm shift in part 2, that's next week, and many examples of existing paradigm shift in part 3, that's 2 weeks from today, and then how to take this information to a wider audience. Civic culture is a word that we'll hear more about next week. Civic culture, building civic culture where people prioritize their time and money to be engaged in their communities, to help the community become a better place. That fits my ideal of the kind of place I want to live in. There's lots of opportunities to make where we live a better place. There's room for everybody. And of course, permaculture is a set of principles and ideals that can be a big help in helping to structure how we make our decisions and how we design this this paradigm shift. Many people associate permaculture with gardening, and permaculture is a great way to design a garden. Permaculture is also a set of ideals and principles for working with the natural world, achieve multiple benefits from a given effort, that you could design an economic system around permaculture. We'll take a closer look at permaculture next week. I like the term invest time and money in the positive. Some people have more capacity to do that. It's not a level playing field. Absolutely not. It's not a fair society. But everybody has something in their own realm that they can contribute to paradigm shift. And the more people who do that, we begin to more support each other. That's incremental. It's gradual. Do we have time to make that happen? We don't really know, but to me, it's the best choice that we have. This is a wonderful tram system in Orléans, France. I couldn't believe, you didn't see very many cars in this town. Look, this is right downtown in Orléans, France. There's trolleys and trams all over. This is another positive example. This is in Eugene. Some friends I know have done a remarkable job of transforming their suburban property. There's a lot of good things happening in Portland, Oregon. In part 3, we'll see some of those examples from Portland and also from some other cities as well. This is a farmer's market in the Cully neighborhood. There's an economic development corporation there. That's every neighborhood should have an economic development corporation. We'll hear more about that. This, again, a photo from Barcelona. I took the photo. I was sitting in this chair right here. Here's a couple of my Barcelona friends. This playground right here, this outdoor cafe, at one time, 7 or 8 years ago, was a busy highway intersection. This was a highway intersection. That's what's happening in the early going in Barcelona. That's really inspiring. So the summary for part 1, capitalism as we know it and its consumer culture are the common denominator of practically every major social, economic, political, environmental, even spiritual problem in the world today. But if people continue to buy all these unhealthy products, we can only expect more of the same. Capitalism, as we know it, cannot survive without promoting vanity, excess consumption, economic growth, and externalizing its cost on people and planet. Non-negotiating, we've heard that. Reducing eco-footprints with healthy values and goals is a big part. It's a critical part of paradigm shift, to use less. That's either going to happen by choice or it's going to happen because we're going to have it forced on us. We can't keep doing this. 10 years, 15, 20, we don't really know. But we can't continue with this type of impact on the planet. And again, paradigm shift is just as much about social interests, social needs as well. It's to protect the environment. It's also to help bring out the best in positive human potential. For me, that's equally important to the environment. The more people helping to bring about a positive and healthy paradigm shift, the better. This is just a quick look at 2 and 3 and 4, the upcoming parts. Yeah, we'll take a look at eco footprints, social footprints, food choices, pushing back on cars, how to help pay for paradigm shift. That's a great topic. And part 3, we'll see some places here in Eugene that I'm familiar with. Duma Co-op, Maitreya Eco Village. One of my favorite places is Los Angeles Eco Village in Los Angeles. I just love telling the stories about what that group is up to in Los Angeles. We'll have more about that in part 3. Young people are an enormous part of paradigm shift. They've got the most to gain. We'll hear a little bit about school garden projects, Onondaga Earth Corps. What's the potential for the Scouts? Well, the Scouts could be a huge part of paradigm shift. And seniors as well. What's the village movement? What could the AARP do for paradigm shift? We'll hear about neighborhood associations, which I'm involved with my neighborhood association. I know what a neighborhood association can do, and I know it can do a whole lot more than what I've seen here in my neighborhood. These are other entities that, whether they know it or not, a lot of people and a lot of organizations may not even identify with paradigm shift, but they're doing paradigm shift work. And to be inclusive and inviting, they can feel empowered when they perhaps recognize, wow, we really are working to build a better society, and all these other people are doing this too. All these other organizations are too. Paradigm shift is a proverbial big tent. And then, of course, part 4, how do we reach out to a wider audience? What if all these progressive organizations realized they were all on the same team? What if they realized that when we address capitalism as an entity, we address a lot of important problems all at the same time? And then finally, we know what the term truth and reconciliation is. This happened in South Africa, it's happened in Canada, it's happened in Finland. It's a process to for a society to address injustice that's happened somewhat in the past and perhaps even right up to the present. Usually minority, indigenous people are on the receiving end of a lot of injustice. This happened in a lot of different countries. It's to call to account the entity that's caused these problems. Well, I think capitalism deserves to be an entity that undergoes a truth and reconciliation process. We'll hear more about that in part 4. So this is the last slide. Lots of benefits to be gained by engaging in paradigm shift. We create our own way that we engage in paradigm shift. There's room for everyone. Everybody has their own particular circumstance, and every one of those circumstances can benefit by paradigm shift. We make the time and money available to help bring about a society that we can be proud of. I'm not proud of what this society is at all. I'm tons proud, and many of the people, thousands of people who are working hard to make it a better place. There's lots of company. So again, I want to thank people for being here. I would welcome people here to help invite other people for the next 2, 3, and 4 parts of this presentation. I have my email in the chat. You're welcome to email me. I can send you any information that you can forward on to your networks and your friends. This information could be useful to a lot of people. So feel free to email me. I'm not going to pass your email on to anybody else. You're welcome to contact me and be a part in making this information available to more people. I'm hoping that this is empowering. It can be helpful to you too. So let's just say thank you